Hello and welcome. Today I will be talking about how the Sumerians lived, what impact they left on civilization, and how they were discovered. If you haven't already checked out my previous video on Sumer's place in the world and time, I suggest you do that first. You may find that some of the information I lay out there helps frame these topics better. Sumerian cities often featured a central ziggurat surrounded by a walled metropolis. The population of these cities constructed their homes from mud bricks or bundles of marsh reeds. To feed themselves, they built networks of irrigation canals to harness the silt-rich waters of the Tigris and Euphrates for farming. The city of Uruk was one of Sumer's oldest and most heavily developed city-states. It featured a thriving trading hub that was surrounded by a 6-mile stretch of wall for its defense. At its peak in 2800 BCE, it had a population between 40,000 to 80,000, probably making it the largest city in the world at that time. The Sumerian city-states held similar cultural traditions and shared a pantheon of gods and goddesses. They were able to write using cuneiform, and so were able to produce detailed records which their neighbours could understand. Despite their shared culture and language, they were not always at peace with one another. Around 2450 BCE, a border dispute between the city-states of Lagash and Umma resulted in the defeat of the latter city-state. To commemorate their victory, Eannatum, the king of Lagash, had the Stele of Vultures built. This limestone monument depicts birds feasting on the flesh of Eannatum's fallen enemies. In the years that followed, Eannatum went on to conquer the whole of Sumer. But despite being the region's first overlord, he would not be the last Sumerian king to do so. Over Sumer's 3,250-year history, it produced many of the important concepts, innovations, and inventions we take for granted today. They invented the division of time into 12-hour days and 12-hour nights, thus giving us a 24-hour day. Those hours they further divided into 60 minutes, and those minutes into 60 seconds. Historians like Samuel Kramer have attributed the Sumerians with the creation of the world's first schools, governments, cosmological studies, aquariums, historians, and many other firsts. Their cultural contributions include the first versions of the Garden of Eden and the biblical flood stories, along with the first heroic epics. The Sumerians also produced the earliest recorded proverbs, animal fables, love songs, literary imagery, and debates on literary works. The infighting between city-states over 1,000+ years gave them the need and time to develop several military advancements, including the phalanx formation and siege warfare. Before the 19th century, the world had forgotten about Sumer's existence. However, during the 1800s, European scholars became interested in studying the reality of biblical stories. They were particularly interested in the sites of Nineveh, Babylon, and a place called Shinar. Shinar was referenced in the book of Genesis and was understood to be a region of Mesopotamia. However, its significance in the biblical world could not be fully appreciated until the mid-1800s, when Western organizations and institutions began sending expeditions to the Middle East in search of evidence from the biblical world. At this time, the stories from the Old Testament were thought to be the oldest literary works in human history, and these expeditions were meant to find hard proof to support these narratives. Instead, they discovered that Shinar referred to Sumer, a land with a far longer history than they had expected, and that most of the Old Testament narratives had sprung from their pagan culture instead. The discovery of Uruk was one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Mesopotamia. Excavation of the site began in 1912 by a German scholarly society known as the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft, and it continued under German archaeologists until the 1980s. Uruk was the mother city of ancient Sumer, where signature technological, cultural, economic and social developments were first developed. It is also the best reference point for understanding the development of early urbanization. Uruk's city wall encompasses 5.5 square kilometers, but less than 5% of that has been dug, and only 0.1% has been excavated to ancient levels. The center of the city features buildings built on top of one another to a depth of 25 meters. These buildings span 35 layers and 4,500 years of urban history. The layering creates difficulties in dating objects found in the different strata, especially cuneiform tablets that have been found in layers of rubble between building levels. According to Margaret van Es, one of the directors of research on Uruk at the Deutsche Archaeology Institute, it would not be sensible to excavate the whole site given the scale and complexity such an operation would require. The King List is one of the greatest sources of information available on Sumer's history. They are clay tablets that document the names and reigns of most of Sumer's rulers. The lists detail a long succession of kings and their reigns over cities in Sumer and its neighbouring areas. In its earliest entries, kings are said to have descended from heaven and are attributed reigns lasting for tens of thousands of years. As the list approaches the present, the length of kings' reigns becomes more realistic, and other evidence for individual kings can be found. At the time of its discovery, the list was prized for its ability to check the biblical chronology of the Book of Genesis and to shed light on the early Mesopotamian political landscape. However, interest changed over time to ask why it was written in the first place. It is now believed that the list was written to normalize the political outlook, but only one city in Sumer could exercise kingship and dominance in any one time. The political outlook is thought to have been used by the Isin dynasty to legitimize themselves as the proper rulers of Sumer. At least 19 different versions of the king list have been unearthed, most dating from the latter half of the Isin dynasty, around 2017 to 1794 BCE. They were found across Mesopotamia at sites including Nippur, Isin, Kish, Larsa, and Susa. The variations between them may be the result of the era in which they were written, as later versions feature additional rulers and extra information on some dynasties. Of all the existing copies of the king list, the Veld Blundell prism represents the most extensive and complete copy. The list is written on 4 sides of a clay prism, with 2 columns to each side, and features a cylindrical channel through the centre of it, perhaps indicating that it was once attached to a wooden pole that enabled it to be rotated for the reader's convenience. Thank you for watching. As always, feel free to leave a like, a comment and/or subscribe. I hope you will stay tuned for more videos in the future. Have a good day.